Texas a swing state. Ohio doesn't look like a swing state anymore. Ohio looks Republican. Florida looks like a swing state. Texas is a great question mark. Nevada looks more blue, but Arizona looks like a swing state. It is going to be a slightly different, if not significantly different, presidential map in 2020 than the one we've been used to seeing the last couple
I'm glad to see that we actually waited, a week and a half till after the 2018 elections to start talking about 2020. Thank you, panel. See you next Sunday. Up next, we'll be back with a final word. For more on the Florida recount and the California wildfires, tune to this station and Fox News Channel. And that's it for today. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Fox News Sunday.
And this is a Fox News alert. Senator Bill Nelson set to make a statement after calling Republican Governor Rick Scott to concede victory in the Florida Senate race.
And correspondent Phil Keating is live in West Palm Beach, Florida, where Nelson's concession is expected any moment now. It marks the end of 46 years in public office, 3 terms as U.S. Senator. It marks the first time in a century that Florida will be represented by 2 Republican senators at the same time. Phil?
Hi, Eric. Yes, it is all over. After 12 hard-fought days full of recounting and lawsuits, the Florida election 2018 is finally done. All that's left is for the final numbers to be certified in Tallahassee Tuesday morning. I can tell you that the Rick Scott campaign, Governor Scott, who hard-fought Nelson for the race for the U.S. Senate seat, he says in a written statement that I just spoke with Senator Bill Nelson, who graciously conceded, and I thanked him for his years of public service. The election is now behind us, and that's where we need to leave it. Eric?
Yeah, Nelson's 76 years old. As I said, he served 3 terms now in the Senate. I mean, look, he's been in office for 46 years, first elected in 1972. What do you think the tipping point was in this race? It is so close, 10,000 votes out of more than 8 million cast. The Scott campaign really tried to portray Nelson as out of touch and out of sync and in office too long.
And the Scott campaign and Scott himself also repeatedly used the word confused, saying Senator Nelson is confused. It was a tight race, a lot of money spent. The governor alone spent about $60 million of his own money, and the state's, of course, been flooded with TV campaign spots. This was also a big call by Scott to Nelson during the race that, you know, he also hit this career politician, kept going with that, saying 3 terms is enough, it's time to move on. And that's what Governor Scott says he actually did graciously back to Senator Nelson, was thanking him for all of his years of public service. Eric?
Yeah, Scott was term limited as governor. What does this mean for the state, Phil? Now that has 2 Republican senators, as we pointed out, in about a century. As we look forward to 2020, that Florida really, in a sense, is tipped more red.
Yeah, Florida is a Republican state at this point, all the way across the top. In every statewide race, except for Nelson over the years, there have been Republicans in every position. The governor's mansion up in Tallahassee, Republicans control both chambers of the Capitol up there in Tallahassee. Senator Nelson was the only Democrat on the statewide ticket that kept being reelected. Well, that is over. Now we'll have 2 U.S. senators from Florida, both Republican. We'll have a new governor in Florida, also Republican. And keep in mind, the state is very friendly to President Donald Trump. You could really say that it was Trump himself who swung the governor's race for Ron DeSantis, coming down and campaigning with him 2 times in the last 4 days of the race. And there had been a longtime Republican that was running for the governor's seat. That was Adam Putnam, the current commissioner of agriculture. Everybody in Florida on the inside thought for sure he is going to be the heir apparent in that race. But DeSantis trumped him in the primary, and Tuesday night, DeSantis beat him again. back to you.
All right, we'll wait for the concession speech, which we expect momentarily, and we'll bring it to you live, of course, when we get that. Phil, thank you so much.
You know what, Eric, and while we wait, why don't we bring in John Bussey? He's on the phone. He's the associate editor for the Wall Street Journal and a Fox News contributor. So, you know, it was a long and hard fought battle, a nail biter till the end. But any surprises to you, John, as for the outcome?
Yeah, not a big surprise. He was leading all along. The expectation was that the recount would show that he would win. But look, this is a notable win for the Republicans. It's expected that they're also going to take the seat in Mississippi after the runoff election there. So they'll have a 53-47 majority in the Senate. That's up from 51-49. Not a bad showing, certainly, after getting walloped in the House, where you really did see the blue wave sweep through. This is going to make it easier for President Trump to get his judicial nominees through the Senate for confirmation. It'll make it easier for him to change out his cabinet, because remember, it's the Senate that has to confirm new cabinet members. And it will provide something of a little bit of momentum, a little bit of help going into 2020, though the results in the House, of course, will mitigate that.
Definitely a notable win for the Republican Party and for the president, who, as you know, is down there, campaigning for Ron DeSantis, who is now the governor-elect of Florida. And, of course, now Senator-elect Rick Scott, who we're waiting to hear from former Senator Bill Nelson. Rick Scott also got the backing from the president. So, pardon me, what do you think we're going to hear, John, from the president later tonight or moments from now via Twitter or in a speech or some sort of statements later?
Yeah, well, he'll want to claim victory. He kind of came out after the election and said it was a great night when, in fact, it really wasn't. And the subsequent days showed that it was actually worse than Election Day, because more seats that were in the House that were still sort of up for grabs fell into the Democratic camp. Notably, Orange County, kind of classically Republican territory, flipping to the Democrats. So he's going to be happy to have this win, and he's going to want to put the election behind him, because he's got a lot of other things to worry about now, including the Mueller investigation.
Yeah, this is true. Go ahead.
Well, notably, it was very interesting. The judge took a moment out in kind of making some of the decisions on what votes are going to be counted and what aren't going to be counted to scold Rick Scott for claiming that there was fraud in the election process, and by implication also scolding the president, because the president had also, without any evidence, claimed that there was fraud, and Rick Scott, without any evidence, had claimed there was fraud. And in fact, it was just kind of the bureaucratic process and the ineptitude sometimes of the bureaucratic process that took us out this late to have a definitive determination of who won.
So, John Bussey, do you expect now Senator-elect Rick Scott to come back and kind of retract what he said, that it wasn't fixed, there wasn't any, sinister stuff happening there in the election in Florida?
I expect him to kind of say, yesterday was yesterday, let's plow on into the future. He kind of ran as a centrist. He's going to have a sort of an interesting role in the Senate. It's going to be very interesting to see also. I mean, the president backed some candidates who, without his backing, may not have won. And so the Senate is a bit more sort of Trump's creation now. And that will help him. That people like Collins and Maine may not have quite as much sway as a centrist.
Let's listen to Senator Bill Nelson.
To fight on and on for the inalienable human rights that are the soul and glory of the American experiment. Civil rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, and the sacred right to vote. We must end all forms of voter suppression, make it easier for Americans to vote, and honor the ideal that we are governed by the majority and not the minority rule. There are great decisions ahead that will shape the course and character of America in the 21st century. And yes, I will continue to fight hard for what's right, and I will also encourage others to seek common ground with their colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Inevitably at times, that effort will fall short, but we have to try. We have to move beyond a politics that aims not just to defeat, but to destroy, where truth is treated as disposable, where falsehoods abound, and that the free press is assaulted as the enemy of the people. There's been a gathering darkness in our politics in recent years. My hope today can be found in the words of John F. Kennedy, who said, "Civility can guide us through that darkness to a safe and sane future." Thank you all. God bless you, and God bless our country.
And John Bussey, I believe you're still on the phone with me. There he goes. That was the statement from, Senator Bill Nelson and his concession there to passing the mantle and the baton to Senator-elect Rick Scott, making a very clear point that he is not going away, Mr. Nelson, that is, and some perhaps veiled statements directed towards the president, saying that it's time to move beyond politics, not just to defeat, but to destroy, to move behind that, to return to civility. And he also mentioned that, civil rights, women's rights, LGBT rights. He wants to end voter suppression, and he wants to remind that we govern by majority, not by minority rule. So, clearly the former senator now, Nelson, graciously conceding, but making it very clear that he has a voice. He has had a voice for, 46 years, and he plans to keep that voice very loud and clear in the public forum.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, he's had a good long run, and this is really his last time in the kind of the at the podium in the public sphere to the extent that he's had in the past. So it's an opportunity for him to kind of hit on some of the key points of what his party is concerned about, and to not so veiled criticism of the president, but do so in a way that he can sort of graciously depart from the scene and pass the baton to a new senator, Rick Scott.
All right, John Bussey, we appreciate your analysis and helping us cover this story here with Senator Bill Nelson conceding to Senator-elect Rick Scott there in Florida.
And Senator-elect Rick Scott has issued a statement. It reads in part, quote, "We must do what Americans have always done, come together for the good of our state and our country. My focus will not be on looking backward, but on doing exactly what I ran on, making Washington work." So now the governor of Florida heads to Washington, D.C., exchanging the State House for the Senate as the new senator-elect. We'll wrap this up with Phil Keating. Phil, it struck me that in the current Senator Bill Nelson's statement, he referenced voter suppression. There have been allegations about that in Florida, perhaps insinuating that maybe he blames what he calls voter suppression for this defeat because it was about 10,000 votes out of 8 million passed. How do you see that shaking out? And what do you see Nelson's legacy as?
Since Thursday, actually really since Election Day, 18 days ago, the thrust of the legal challenges by Democratic Senator Nelson have pretty much circled around that whole voter suppression argument, suggesting that all of the votes weren't counted in a nutshell around the state, but he could have actually kept his legal challenges going, trying to earn a few more votes in this race. But as we have now seen and heard, Senator Nelson is giving it all up and conceding defeat to Republican Governor Rick Scott, who is finishing up his 2 terms as governor in Tallahassee. And after that, he will be headed to Washington, D.C. His whole theme of the campaign was let's get to work. And he vowed that career politicians need to go, and he will get up there and do what he did for Florida, according to him, and that is get to work, create jobs, and keep taxes very low. Here's how close Florida is. Remember, it's a toss-up swing state. Both parties fight for this state bitterly for presidential years. This was also one of those campaigns and one of those election years because both parties really felt that whoever controls the governor's mansion as well in Tallahassee would help them in the 2020 presidential elections. And here's what it came down to in the Senate race. 50.05% for Scott, 49.93% for Nelson out of 8 million votes cast. That is a margin of difference of 10,000 votes. Eric?
And they say every vote counts. This is certainly proof of that. A venerable Democratic senator has been retired by the people of his state in favor of a upstart Republican. As you say, Senator Nelson has now will be finishing his terms as Florida looks forward to 2020 and the Republican slate when that comes. Perhaps a change in politics for your state. Phil, thanks so much.
And we are going to have much more on this very race. And now the new Senator-elect Rick Scott coming up at 4 o'clock Eastern. Please stick around for that. But in the meantime, stay tuned right now as we rejoin you to Journal Editorial Report in Progress.
To the Trump White House that they were dissatisfied. We saw this in the polling in Senate races. You had roughly, no matter what the number of people were that approved of the president, and it ranged from, basically the high 40s in some states to the 60s in some of these red states that there were Senate elections this year. Just less than 1/3 of the voters said, I don't approve of him personally, but I approve of his policies, while 2/3 of the people who approved of him said, I approve of both. But you had, interestingly enough, about 10% of the electorate that said, I approve of his policies, but I don't approve of him personally, and I'm going to give him an unfavorable rating overall. And those were people primarily in the suburbs, particularly college-educated and particularly college-educated women.
Okay, as you go ahead to look ahead to 2020, then how does the GOP and particularly President Trump get them back? Because he's got to reassemble that coalition that won in 2016 in states where he got really thumped: Pennsylvania, Ohio. Well, Ohio they did all right, but Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and he came close in 2016 in Minnesota, but this year was a wipeout.
Yeah, well, in Georgia is a defense, and North Carolina is going to be defense. Florida is going to be defense. They came relatively close in Colorado, but that's going to be a problem. So, look, we have two problems with suburban voters. Our old problem used to be that they were relatively socially moderate but economically conservative. They remain that way today, but in addition to navigating those shoals, you have to deal with the fact that they don't like the president's tone. They don't like how he handles things. They don't like how he tweets. They want a different tone in a president that is more optimistic and unifying than they're seeing right now.
Okay, so if that's a fixable problem if Trump is willing to do it. All right, let's talk about Nancy Pelosi a bit before we go. I mean, you did an interesting column this week, kind of adding up the number of Democrats who are now in Congress who said, I'm not going to vote for, I don't want to vote for, or some different gradations of that. Do you think she's going to win anyway?
I think she will, but let's be clear about it. There are 234 Democrats. There are 26 Democrats who, during the campaign, said explicitly, I will not support her.
Right.
11 of those were incumbents. The rest are freshmen. And that means that if all of them held true to their word, she'd get 208 votes, 10 short of what she needs in order to be Speaker. She'd still have the majority. There are only going to be 201 Republicans, so she'd still have the majority. But if they voted for somebody else, she'd come up short of the 218. Now, theoretically, they could all vote present rather than voting for somebody, and that would lower the number of votes that she would need. In that case, it would lower it down to about 205, I think, or 206. But she's got to get 218, and the only way she can get there now is one of two ways. Either people break their word that they gave to the voters with the very first vote they cast in Congress, or they vote present, and it's going to be sort of hard to explain that one, too.
Well, voting present, I mean, is a cop-out. Let's face it. I mean, I said I'd vote against her, and then I said, oh, well, I chickened out in the end. That can show up in an ad in 2020 as well as voting for her.
Absolutely. And look, we're likely to see that happen. We've already seen it happen in the Senate. Senator Kristen Sinema of Arizona said in the campaign, under no circumstances will I support Chuck Schumer for Senate Democratic leader. And yesterday he was elected Senate Democratic leader unanimously.
All right, Carl. Well, politicians not keeping their word. What a surprise. Thank you. When we come back with polls showing that health care was the pivotal issue in the midterm elections, Democrats.
We're going to be relentlessly focused on the issues that matter to the people. First and foremost, lower health care costs, provide better, stronger coverage. From prescription drugs to premiums, we Democrats are going to continue to press our Republican colleagues for better, more comprehensive health care.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer Wednesday promising to make health care a central part of the Democratic agenda in the next 2 years as the party looks toward 2020. Polls show that health care was the top issue for voters in the midterm elections, with Democrats stoking fears that Republicans would end coverage of pre-existing conditions. We're back with Dan Henninger, Kim Strassel, and Kate Batchelder Odell. So, Kate, do you think, you look at all the exit polling, you look at the races, did the failure of Republicans to repeal and replace Obamacare cost them the House?
Yes, I think that's absolutely the conclusion you have to take, because I think what happened, Paul, was there was a bit of a double bind in that the base was unhappy that the party failed to repeal the law, and more moderate and independent voters were unhappy that the party tried to repeal the law. So they took all of the political heat of having succeeded without having any of the accomplishments or policy outcomes they could point to. They were in a double bind. I don't think it's like what the left says, which is that the law is just increasingly durable and popular.
So if they had actually done something and passed a repeal and replace, then they could have pointed to that and said, see, we've done something to address this issue, and here's how we would handle pre-existing conditions. When they failed, what happened is that the Democrats could say, see, they wanted to do this, and you're just trying to prove a counterfactual.
Right, exactly. It would have disproven the theory that people were going to be thrown off their insurance for having a pre-existing condition. I think also, Paul, we saw Republicans supporting a lawsuit on the constitutionality of some of Obamacare's mandates, including the pre-existing condition mandate. And while these are sort of interesting legal questions, it's not likely to prevail. And the people supporting it, the candidates supporting it, took a huge political hit for having supported it. And it doesn't seem to have been worthwhile. It looks like a political loser.
And that was Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, who led that, and we criticized him for that, I recall. You probably wrote the editorial, Kate, but and then he came back and said, oh, no, this is good. But it really did hurt them.
It did. And look, it's just unfortunately, it's not going to convince John Roberts to strike down the Affordable Care Act. He already went through so much struggle to find a way to uphold it. And I don't see this changing the outcome. And what Republicans really should be doing is spending this time in the wilderness thinking about how they're going to sell their ideas better if they get another shot at repealing the law.
Kim, Jason Lewis, who was running in Minneapolis suburbs, a Republican incumbent, he lost his race, wrote for us this week that John McCain killing repeal and replace was the real in the Senate was the real decisive vote. And of course, that got a lot of criticism. How can you criticize John McCain? But what do you think of that?
No, there's something to that. Look, it's just the way it was. John McCain was very proud of that vote, and we should remember that he took it. He and Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, the Republicans, were on a knife's edge, close enough to get this through. It would have given them, as Kate said, both the actual success of repealing it, but the ability to then go out and see some changes in the law that helped bring down prices and where people could see what was actually happening. They didn't do it in the end. It was a huge failure on that part, given the campaign promise. And yeah, I mean, look, the House Republicans bore the brunt of the decision made by a handful of senators on the other chamber.
So, Dan, where do the Democrats, when Chuck Schumer says or threatens, depending on your point of view, we're going to make health care our focus, what are they going to do?
Threaten. Yeah, let's go with threaten.
Well, Obamacare, they passed that, and now basically it hurt them for several elections, and now they're now champions of it.
The Democrats for the next year are going to be aiming at two targets. One, Donald Trump. The other, the pharmaceutical industry, big pharma. Elijah Cummings, who's becoming chairman of the House Oversight Committee, which is a tremendously powerful committee, is probably going to spend about 70% of his time tormenting the Trump administration, but he says he intends to investigate the pharmaceutical industry. And he's going to issue subpoenas, he's going to ask questions about drug prices, and the goal is going to be to kind of use that as a cat's paw to get them to compromise on some sort of deal that regulates drug prices in the United States. And the problem is that the president of the United States himself seems to be willing to do that. He has talked about associating Medicare Part B prescription prices to those in developed countries over in Europe. So Big Pharma has really got its work cut out for him defending its innovation.
Yeah, I think, Kate, that's a possibility for Trump. He might go for that. And then also, what about Medicare for all? Is that something that Democrats are going to push, or are they going to, in the House and Senate, or are they going to leave that to the presidential candidates?
You know, Paul, I think they're going to be relatively quiet about that over the next couple years, because I think it's really unpopular with the public when you start to talk about, eliminating employer-sponsored insurance, right? I mean, the Bernie Medicare for All bill was not written to become law. It was written as sort of a eccentric policy proposal. And so I don't think it's helpful to Democratic House candidates to hold it up as what they're really about. I think that Dan's right. They're really going to coalesce more on the pharmaceutical price controls idea, because it's something that they think Trump can be amenable to, and maybe talk about things like a public option for insurance and wait for Medicare for All to really litigate that in the presidential debates in 2020.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Still ahead, Amazon's announcement of its new headquarters in New York and Virginia, drawing backlash. In a much anticipated announcement, Amazon said this week that it plans to open 2 new headquarters in the D.C. suburbs of Arlington, Virginia, and the borough of Queens in New York City. But outrage is growing as details of the deal emerge, with New York State alone offering more than $1.5 billion in tax breaks and incentives to the retail giant in return for bringing a promised 25,000 jobs to its new campus. Mayor Bill de Blasio called it a great day for New York City, but even newly elected Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a Democratic socialist, called the taxpayer subsidies extremely concerning. We're back with Dan Henninger, Wall Street Journal columnist Bill McGurn, and editorial board member Alicia Finley. So, Bill, my favorite part of this is the helipad that they get at the new campus.
Right.
I guess that will not be available to everyone.
Right.
But is this a good deal for New York and Virginia?
No, it's not. It shows that the real threat to the economic order isn't socialism, it's corporatism. Like, call us old-fashioned, but if you're going to have welfare, it should be for the poor, not for the world's richest man. And that seems to be uniting people. I mean, Governor Cuomo's defense of this deal was extraordinary. In the New York Times, he basically said, since our tax rates are such a disincentive, anyone in his right mind, just judging by the merits, would go to Texas. Therefore, I had to cough up a lot of stuff to get Amazon to come here, to give them privileges and favors that other people don't get.
But who's responsible for those tax rates?
Right.
Right? I mean,
right.
He could change those.
Right.
But that's hard.
Look, that's the difference. They're all betting. You jack your rates. You have a business unfriendly environment in the state, right? And then you play favorites and you try to get someone to bail you out like this. Look, it's not the first time. Governor Cuomo had that Buffalo billion, ended in corruption. None of the jobs produced that it promised.
That was a subsidy program for business in upstate
New York, and ended in corruption and failure.
I don't think it's ended. It's continued.
Right.
Well, so Alicia, from Amazon's point of view, though, even though all that's true about Jeff Bezos, it's hard to blame him, I guess, it seems to me, if the politicians are willing to shower him with money. I mean, he's a pragmatic businessman, and if they're saying, here, you can have all this, then why not take it?
Right. I mean, Elon Musk did the same thing with Nevada and a battery factory. If they're going to give him a couple $2 billion, why not?
And Scott Walker with Foxconn in Wisconsin.
And now he's suggesting another package for Kimberly-Clark to help rescue jobs there. This is bipartisan on both sides. But really, the politicians should be responsible and be more responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars.
But 260-some jurisdictions tried to get Amazon. So this is...
And Amazon actually turned down something like Maryland with and Newark, which offered even bigger subsidies, which suggests maybe it would have gone to New York and D.C. anyways.
Because why? Because
it has more intellectual capital. It has talent, right? Tech talent. I mean, finance, banks, and hedge funds are really recruiting engineers. Amazon will be able to poach some of those.
The figure, Dan, that I like, another one is that Google has a big presence in New York as well. I think they have something like 10,000 jobs here. They're not getting a package of $1.5 billion. And I think Alicia's point is the salient one. They might have gone here anyway, New York anyway, because of the other things it offers.
Yeah, they might have. I mean, one of the things Amazon says is they need a heavy core, a critical mass of technological workers, and they feel New York, Northern Virginia is going to be able to provide that. The city of Columbus said, we admit we don't have enough technical workers to supply Amazon with 25,000 people. All that aside, to me, the most fascinating thing going on here is that this deal was done by Mayor Bill de Blasio and Governor Andrew Cuomo, both typical, probable candidates for the Democratic nomination. They are getting hammered by fellow Democrats who are just dumping on them for giving away this $2 billion. I think what's going on here is that Ocasio-Cortez, the head of the city council, are upset that this money has gone to Amazon and not to their pet project. It's not as though they're upset about corporate welfare. It's just that the money's all gone now.
It's the wrong corporate welfare.
Exactly. Look, that's what happens when you politicize decisions. One of the really bad aspects of this was that a lot of the cities didn't say what they were offering. You know, they're going to spend the taxpayers' money, but it was secret. Some disclosed, some didn't. But I think Amazon insisted on a non-disclosure clause for the last 20, the finalists. So this really was the case. We had to agree to it to find out what was in it. And I think that's why people are also just sprung on them this way.
Is there any chance that this could be undone in either New York State or New York City or perhaps Virginia?
I think it'd be hard to undo it. I think it'll be very hard. Some of the incentives already exist. It's just that they're applying it to Amazon, right?
Oh.
Some of the things exist.
Some of them, but some of them are also
But it is,
special.
you know, I think the Wall Street Journal's position is right. We don't want bodega owners and guys that work at a laundromat to have to subsidize billionaires, right?
Right. Still ahead, plunging oil prices, Britain's messy divorce from the EU. We'll take a closer look at what's driving world economic jitters and what the U.S. needs to do to adapt to a potential global slowdown. Global economic worries ratcheting up this week as oil prices plummeted to a one-year low on Tuesday, a sign that demand for energy could be slowing amid a sluggish world economy. This as the British pound dropped sharply Thursday after Prime Minister Theresa May's draft divorce deal with the European Union was thrown into doubt. We're back with Dan Henninger, Alicia Finley, and Bill McGurn. So, Dan, how worried should we be about the world economy right now?
Well, I think there's a lot of reason to be concerned, Paul, because the United States, on the one hand, seems to be booming. We're at full employment. All the signs of consumer confidence are tremendously strong. But if you look out around the world, this picture isn't so bright. Germany's economy contracted in the last quarter. Europe itself seems to be slowing down. You just described what's going on in the UK with Brexit. Japan's economy slowed also in the last quarter, and China's growth rate is now about 6.5%, which is really kind of low for them. So you get the sense that there is a lot suppressing the global economy out there. The dollar's very strong, but it's kind of delinking from some of these other currencies, and usually when that happens, bad things happen.
What's behind it, Bill? I think you've got some bad policy choices in political turmoil in Europe, for example. But rising interest rates also here in the U.S., which is drawing capital from the rest of the world.
That hurts the president in a way. He's been so critical of the Fed chairman, and he actually has some points, but it makes it harder for the Fed chairman to do the right thing without looking like he's a lackey of the president.
Maybe pausing what we think will be the interest rate increase in December.
I think it's the right idea, but the timing is everything. Look, I think the United States is fundamentally sound. I mean, I reject the idea that we're on a sugar high. I think that the corporate tax cuts really change the structure and the incentives for investment. But look, I live in the suburbs. When you buy a house, you want a nice community. Like, it's no good to just have a really nice house yourself, right? You depend on the community and the downtown to be prosperous too, and we don't live in a zero-sum world. These people are our customers. If their economies, the two other big economies, Japan and Germany, are contracting, you know, there's less that they can buy of our stuff. And
yeah, it's a difference, Alicia, between maybe having 3.5% growth continuing here, or going back down to the slows of 2.5%, which Donald Trump promised he'd get us out of.
I think that's right. I mean, during the third quarter, you did see a drop in business investment down to about 0.8%. Consumer spending has been pretty buoyant, but if you want to maintain 4% growth or above 3%, you're going to have to maintain a higher level of business investment, and that is going to require buoyant foreign global markets.
And the trade piece of this, Dan, I don't think you can underestimate. If you the third quarter figure that Alicia mentioned included that investment figure, I think that was partly trade related. You know, you have one thing we criticized Barack Obama for was all the regulation, which caused something of a capital strike as businesses said, hey, I don't know who's going to hit me next year, so I'm not going to make that investment. Trade operates in a similar way. It's arbitrary government that can hit people with tariffs or new rules to change their supply chains. If that happens, they may say, if that you fear that might happen, then you say, well, I'm going to hold off on investment.
Yeah. Well, President Trump argues that we want to open the Chinese market, and there are certain disparities in our trading relationships with all of these other countries that justify these tariffs that he has imposed. Be that as it may, the negotiations, especially with China, are going nowhere. And so the tariff regime that he's imposed on China is beginning to look chronic. That's a long-term problem because you've got all these complicated global supply chains. Companies have to make decisions based on whether they're going to make money in the context of these tariffs. I think probably the best thing the president could do right now, given what we've just described, is pull back to a great degree on the tariff war that he's undertaken and ensure that the global economy doesn't slow down, because if it does, it's going to be hurting him possibly in 2020 when he's running for re-election.
Dan, Bill, last question. Wilbur Ross, one of the trade hawks in the administration, Commerce Secretary, said, well, we're going to have a trade framework with President Xi of China and the G20 later in November.
I think we need something positive now. I mean, look, that's the danger. You mentioned supply chains. I think a lot of people just think trade is things for things, but a lot of the pricing of your own goods and stuff comes from a very complicated network. And when you put tariffs on, you just blow the whole thing up. So I think the pressure right now is on. Look, the bad news was Peter Navarro, one of the hawks, right, was out there warning Wall Street, don't pressure us on China. And then Larry Kudlow, of course, warned Peter Navarro, said, don't pressure them on this.
A sign of the debate internally in the White House. When we come back, as California continues to battle its devastating history with dozens of people killed and more than 600 still unaccounted for. President Trump, who is visiting the state this weekend, faced criticism earlier in the week for his initial response to the blazes, tweeting that they were a result of gross mismanagement of California's forests and threatening to pull federal funding if the state didn't remedy the situation. We're back with Dan Henninger, Kim Strassel, and Alicia Finley. So, Alicia, we don't know how these started, right?
Well, not yet. They suspect the one in the north may have been started by a PG&E, the state utility, some kind of a transmission line, maybe outage or something went down.
Why do these fires seem, and maybe seem is the right word, because we got the immediacy of them, why do they seem to be worse now?
Well, right now, you're coming after a 6 or 7 year drought. Conditions are extremely dry. Right now in California, it's in the 80s, whereas here...
Temperatures, right.
Right, temperatures are in the 80s, low humidity. So it's dry, it's hot, and you have high winds. And there's a lot of combustible fuel after 6 or 7 years of dead trees, 130 million in the state.
And in terms of the human damage, the city, the towns and homes and so on, it's because people are building closer.
That's right.
To
There's
many
increasing development. I mean, I don't think environmentalists complain about that, but that's also partly because of zoning regulations on the coast that really
restrict
development.
So they move closer.
They move
further,
closer. That's exactly.
Their way. Okay. Now, what about this Trump point about that is gross mismanagement? He got a lot of criticism for the threat, which turns out to be phony threat that he'd cut off funding. But he did. Does he have a point about forest mismanagement?
Yes. I mean, the federal government and state government have really restricted the ability to manage forests, and that includes tree trimming, logging, controlled burns.
Why do that? Why?
Well, mainly because environmentalists oppose all of these. They will believe
they want just natural growth?
Yeah, right, exactly. But you have to think about back in the 1700s, about 4.5 million acres of land would actually burn a year in California. Right now, it's about 1 million. You cannot return everything to the state of nature because humans were not here in the state of nature.
So, Kim, do you know, you've followed this forestry issue a lot, I know, over the years in other states, not just California. Is the Trump administration doing anything to improve it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is really great news. Go back a year ago, September 2017, Ryan Zinke put out a memo giving all of his park managers and land managers across his entire Interior Department the ability to now, for the first time in 20 years, use whatever resources necessary to proactively clear away dead brush and undergrowth and dead trees and clean up the forests. This is new and important. This really goes back to the Clinton era when Bill Clinton turbocharged forest mismanagement by sharply reducing logging and road construction in federal grounds. And we've never come back from that. You know, back before his tenure, the Forest Service, I think, spent about 16% of its money on fighting fires. Now it's more than half. And that poaches money from the necessary programs we need to clear away this underbrush and problem in the first place.
Dan, speaking of politicians and what they say about this, Jerry Brown, the governor of California, blamed the fires on climate deniers.
I would say arguably one of the most irresponsible things Jerry Brown has ever said. Look at the incredible human destruction and devastation that is taking place in California right now. There is a legitimate debate over how those forests should be managed in California. But the left is proposing that this is all about climate change, not just Jerry Brown, left-wing politicians, celebrities in California. And I'm going to say that I'll bet you they suppress any initiative out there to try to rationalize their forest policy by simply dismissing it as a problem of climate change that has to be addressed. Very little is going to get done to address California's forest problem.
All right, thank you all. We have to take one more break. When we come back, hits and misses of the week.